Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good morning to those of us joining from the US. It's 11 a.m. in Houston and 10 p.m. after dinner time in Pakistan. My name is Ali Nomani, and I am the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Outclass, an edtech platform based in Pakistan. And it's my honor to moderate this session with President Wasif Rizvi Saab of Habib University. I'm going to begin with Wasif Saab's introduction and then sort of lay out the format of today's discussion. So Wasif Rizvi Saab is the first and founding president of Habib University, Pakistan's first undergraduate focused liberal arts and science institution. As the founding president, Wasif has led the vision of creating a center of higher learning that provides interdisciplinary and contextual education to the Pakistani youth. His achievements are visible by Habib University's unmatched global partnerships, distinguished faculty, well-recognized curriculum, exponentially growing diversity of student body, and an innovative campus design that has received international awards of excellence in planning for new campus. Wasif has been instrumental in bringing about a change in Pakistan's higher education by focusing attention towards student-centered learning and the role of private institutions. He is a recognized advocate for introducing the liberal arts and sciences education model in Pakistan. Under his leadership, Habib University has received global recognition and has collaborations with leading institutions including Texas A&M University, University of Michigan Ann Arbor, Claremont Consortium of Colleges, and with Stanford University. The collaborations support in developing a world-class intellectual experience, introducing innovative pedagogical techniques, focusing on faculty development, and providing study abroad opportunities to students. Wasif has been involved in various areas of education developing in the developing world for the last 2 decades. Prior to initiating Habib University project, Wasif was associated with the Aga Khan Education Services in Pakistan and many other development projects in Asia and Africa. Wasif holds twin degrees from Harvard Kennedy School of Government and Harvard Graduate School of Education. Wasif Saab, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're most welcome. Wasif Saab, so why don't you tell us what you're doing in the US? I am aware that you had a really successful community building event hosted for Habib University yesterday, but why don't you tell us about that?
To quote our keynote speaker Anwar Maqsood Saab, कि कोलंबस ने अमेरिका इसलिए दरियाफ्त किया था कि कई सदियों बाद यहाँ पर पाकिस्तानी ह्यूस्टन में आकर फंड रेजिंग करें. So that's exactly what we were doing. We actually but our story is somewhat different. We had no plans to create a fundraising platform in Houston. As it happened, as per our imagination and analysis of higher education, we thought that the message of supporting a university would resonate more naturally with the US audience, because higher education has a very peculiar story around the world. The most unique one was written in United States, way before United States existed. 140 years before the creation of United States, a university was formed in 1636. Aur uske baad, then there were a few other universities that came, and there was something very extremely unique about them. That was that they were the first institutions of higher learning, which were created and then curated and nurtured by common people and the community. And that became basically the blueprint for American higher education, especially private universities. And when public universities came along, they retained many such features as well. So you would see in US universities a unique feature of robust public participation, community participation, a lot of legacies that people proudly build within universities. Of course, alumni engagement continues. So uski bunyad par we thought that we need to find some audience in America. And in Houston, this wonderful family that has now very tenuous and fading ties with Pakistan, the Dhanani family, they responded to it, gave Habib University a major grant. The School of Science and Engineering is named after them. तो उनकी वजह से organically a platform grew in Houston. And Alhamdulillah, just yesterday we had an event. Mohsen Bhai is here. He was with me there at that hotel till like 1 a.m. until they threw us out. And about 500 people, mostly of Pakistani origin, came and engaged with our story and resonated with it.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Sounds like it was a great event, and hopefully Habib University will have several more hosted for it in the near future. So speaking of sort of community, and now moving our discussion specifically towards Habib University, I want to let the audience know that our discussion will center around 3 questions, and they are, what is Habib University and why was a university such as this set up in Karachi? Why at this juncture in Pakistan's history? My second question will be, what are Habib University's plans over the next 5 years and then the next 10 years, and what contributions it is making towards research, innovation, and especially leadership development in Pakistan? And finally, how Wasif Saab sees the higher education landscape shifting over the next few years, how Habib University is positioning itself for those challenges, and what implications they will have for the students and the workforce of Pakistan. So Wasif Saab, let's dive right into the first question. Why Habib University? Why right now? And please, in the course of your answer, highlight for us what differentiates Habib both in action and in ethos, and how the reception so far has been over the last 10 years.
Right. So the question of why is actually a relatively straightforward one. So Pakistan is the 5th largest country in the world, and everybody knows, and it has been quoted numerous times, that the vast majority of that population is younger people. And a way of sort of cashing in on that demographic dividend is to have good quality institutions of especially higher learning. Pakistan has had a peculiar history of higher learning. In the 60s, the martial law government attacked higher education at that time, changed it or reduced it to basically vocational training into a couple of disciplines which are known as engineering and medicine at the time. The so-called German model was popular. People thought that that would be like a quicker track towards national development. That gave them the cover. So Pakistani universities were evacuated more and more of any kind of deeper intellectual investigation or meaning. By the time we came along, it was already a decade or more after 9/11 when we were seeing the ravages of what was happening in Pakistan, and it was very clear that universities were at best bystander and at worst were participating in the chaos that ensued, the social chaos. So, so looking at all of that, and of course, the traditional reasons for university, which is economy and human resource, those were not idle reasons either. So we thought that we need to really sincerely imagine a different kind of intellectual experience and especially at an undergraduate level. क्योंकि हमारे तज्जिए के मुताबिक जो पाकिस्तान में सबसे ज़्यादा confused or neglected section of education था वो undergraduate, which is known as the BA program. And then we looked at some of the most inspiring models, which are rooted in liberal arts tradition. So within that, we thought it is actually possible to craft a powerful experience, which can be structured as well as a curriculum and as a syllabus. So that's how the initial blueprint of Habib University's intellectual imagination came into being. So this was, and that's why we created this unique program, which is liberal arts based, first of its kind, because it's very contextualized. It deals with few very challenging questions that Pakistani youth continue to grapple with, whether consciously or unconsciously. Historical questions, questions of national identity, questions of religion. And this liberal arts program enables them to reflect on them with greater intellectual depth. With that, we wanted to create a very rigorous program that will that will generate a problem-solving, critical thinking, and hopefully carrying a leadership potential workforce as well. So these were very acute historical reasons that we thought that an institution like Habib University is crucially required in Pakistan. The other part of that analysis was that even if we created a great intellectual experience, who this intellectual experience is going to be delivered to. Mm-hmm. And that's a steeper question, right? With a little bit of history, private universities in the world did not exist until 40, 50 years ago, with the exception of the country where I am in right now, with United States. So the idea of creating an institution that is supported by the community, that is participated and sustained by the community, is unique to the US. It somehow, for a variety of reasons, remained contained in the US. The rest of the world was introduced via colonization, the public sector, public university model. और पाकिस्तान में भी वही model राइज था until 1980s. So much so that constitutionally, it was not possible to create a private university. So the first private university in Pakistan was created out of a martial law decree, which is Aga Khan University. So Ziaul Haq, the ordinance was, he wrote it in his capacity as Chief Martial Law Administrator. The same is true for LUMS. So after Zia's regime was over, the democratic government gave it the right constitutional cover. उसके बाद private universities और बनना शुरू हुए. लेकिन चूंकि they did not have that tradition which US has had now for 400 years, they didn't have any sustainability model except for tuition. And if you were to create a tuition-based institution of decent quality, it automatically disenfranchises close to 99% of possible students. And by the time Habib University's planning started, that was 2011-12, we looked at that picture. तो उसमें एक उसका indicator ये है कि पाकिस्तान में high school से about 92-93% high school students come out of what is known as local examination boards, जो कि public examination boards हैं. And 6-7% come out of Cambridge stream, A-level and O-level. Lekin if you looked at the enrollment of some of the key private universities, this equation is reversed. Yeah. So about 96-97% of enrollment comes from that 6-7%, and this 92-93% is almost disappeared. So when we looked at the kind of intellectual experience we wanted to create, we couldn't possibly have such narrow spectrum of students as the audience. So that's when we thought that we'll be the first private university outside of the US which will not be dependent on student tuition. And that required for us to then go to the community. Or Pakistan mein community ke liye to support an institution of higher learning is not a natural cause. Pakistanis are generous and they have been very charitable. But the idea of philanthropy is basically charity, and a lot of very basic causes are much closer to their heart. So this is something, this is a case that we presented to first, obviously the first audience of it were Habib family, and they have been tremendously generous. And they not only created the university, but also supported it in this particular cause. And as a result, a community started to take shape in Karachi. Karachi is very unique in this regard, has been, has a long history of very generous philanthropy and institutions like that. So usme, alhamdulillah, the resonance occurred. And we are, so we have a very diverse classroom. Lekin uske andar bhi phir we made sure that we set aside 40% of our enrollment that has to come from local examination boards. जब हमने नीट ब्लाइंड भी कर दिया, उसके बावजूद एफएस यानी local examination board background के students were not applying because they didn't think a private university that too, looking like an elite institution is not really for them. So we had to create a sort of an affirmative action in which we created this program. Jisme 40% have to come from there, and they are all fully funded. So their 4-year fully funded 100% scholarship was guaranteed if they would get in. So that program gradually has taken great roots, and as a result, we have a very diverse student population. About 85% of them we support very substantially. So the meaning of that intellectual experience was deepened because the resonance with such diversity of students is crucial.
So, Wasif Sahab, something you said that we've been very intentional about contextualizing the education experience of our students. What does that mean in the context of students learning in Pakistan? What are some priorities for Habib University, and why or why not is it hard for other universities to emulate, in your opinion?
So you have to take humanities seriously, right? So so one has to very genuinely intellectually believe that the foundational purpose of education is to enable these young students to make some sense of the world and make some sense of their experience. Contrary to common belief, it is not to learn how to program in Python or something. So
sure.
Right. And we really wanted to reestablish the stature of humanities as the core of our education. Within the core, they do learn scientific method, they do learn quantitative thinking, not to undermine them. And humanities then they provide a great deal of comparative possibilities as well. Sure. So at Habib University, we do have actually a major called comparative humanities. So there is a great deal of reflection, especially in the past few years, to challenge the Eurocentric aspect of humanities, which is very good. So there are lots of scholars who are looking at philosophy and looking at history and looking at literature from a very comparative lens. So I think that's the fundamental grounding that Habib University provides for students to make some profound sense of the world that they are living in, the historical moment that they are part of, the experiences that they are going through. And then they are not intimidated by them. If you can make some sense of them, then you're not intimidated. You can critically reflect on it. And with the skills that you get, you can actually do something about it as well. So that's what is fundamentally different at Habib University compared to any other institution in Pakistan and currently perhaps most in the world.
And can you speak specifically about some student experiences where this manifests, or for example, the YOSIN program or some other aspect of Habib that remains truly unique to it?
So the most unique thing is that if you talk to our best computer science student and best electrical engineering student and ask them that, what is the most interesting thing you did at Habib, they wouldn't quote anything from computer science or electrical engineering. They will invariably point to liberal core and how they understood reality and history differently, and how they will now look at their engineering and their computer science skills differently. So that part of student experience is so vivid, so clear. And obviously it now feels that it is natural, but obviously it's something that we had to do. There was no tradition of it in Pakistan. Yeah. The other part is different pedagogy, right? So Habib University is a very student-centered institution. That's another battle we are fighting in the imbalance that has occurred in global academy, where teaching has been relegated as a labor, evacuated of any kind of intellectual meaning, and the entire focus of academics have been pushed to either publish or perish, right? So to rehabilitate the intellectual stature of teaching, to bring joy in it, to bring intellectual reflection and depth in it, to learn from some of the more interesting pedagogical practices that are going on around the world, like design thinking and engagement and working together and problem solving. That's another unique aspect of Habib University, and our faculty has been brilliant in that. So the kind of commitment and devotion they have to their students is phenomenal. So that's another experience that remains with students, and I think makes us quite distinct.
That's wonderful. And so, speaking of sort of, I think like last time we had a discussion, it was quite insightful for me. This one point you touched on, you briefly touched on it again today, is the Eurocentricity of the academic information available out there in the world. And so how challenging is it to reconcile having to teach our own history to our students written by Europeans, or sort of how are you addressing that gap, or however you want to phrase it? And maybe you can explain what I mean for our audiences a little bit as well.
Right. Now, this is now a great awareness. So without quoting the university, respecting their privacy, one of the best universities in the world, I was just spending a day there not too long ago. And there they're facing a real crisis in Western civilization classes. Young people are not interested in listening to old white people pontificate about the greatness of West. So there is a great time for scholars who are able to really bring, via their research, bring out very different perspectives. And Habib University is fortunate to have quite a few of them. So that's why we have the prefix comparative in front of everything: comparative history, comparative philosophy, comparative religion, comparative literature. That there is nothing generic, right? So if you walk into any Western university and you walked into a philosophy department, there will be a thing called philosophy, which basically means white philosophy. And everything else will be something else, Islamic philosophy or Chinese philosophy. So everything is qualified except for Western. That's not the case at Habib. So everything is comparative. And that's the first intellectual signal that we gave, that we are pulling out of that. And now, you know, if you look hard, there are many scholars who have done phenomenal work, scholars of non-European origin who have done that. Even many European scholars have done brilliant work. The origin of it, of course, the seminal part of that was the writing of Orientalism by Edward Said. तो उसको भी 50 साल 40 साल हो गए. So उसकी वजह से there has been a scholarly movement to actually recraft humanities with a much richer lens. And I think Habib University is perhaps one of the very few if in the world who has adopted it not as an exotic project, but as a foundational project of our humanities.
Sure. Sure. Thank you. There's a question from Saida Sadaf Dara Rizvi, and I think I had asked something similar earlier. So thinking of that computer science major that you were discussing earlier, who would reflect on his humanities experience and extrapolating that to sort of the last 4 or 5 years of alumni, how has Pakistan and then the world at large received alumni of Habib University who have gone through these types of unique experiences?
So everybody in society, including employers and CEOs and so on, have been reflecting on the limitedness and the narrowness of graduates that they were getting from existing universities. So they would say that, you know, we would love someone with critical thinking skill, someone who can problem solve, someone who can work in diverse teams, someone who is respectful of gender diversity and etc. So from that perspective, our graduates have been celebrated greatly. And obviously they have to go through very rigorous programs to have cutting edge skills. So I think that somehow it became, I don't know where it came from, that this dichotomy that if you are thoughtful and you have an understanding of the world, somehow you are not employable. It makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever, but practically that's what it meant. But thankfully it has been proven resoundingly wrong.
Yes,
they are deeply employable. They are in high demand, and their unique skills are not only identified but are celebrated and acknowledged.
Yeah. So hoping we are starting to see this shift. I think sort of 10, 15 years ago, when I was in the US still, we started seeing a trend where the beloved employers of undergraduates, such as the consulting firms and other big names, were starting to recruit heavily from places like Amherst College and Pomona and so on and so forth. And I think relying on that varied skill set rather than a lot of depth, which we know, we're not saying that it's one or the other, but that foundational core felt really attractive to them. And I think increasingly, as I also am thinking about employability of students, like that's what the world needs. So it's heartening to hear that. Thank you. So Wasif Sahab, I'm moving to my second question, which is, what are Habib University's plans over the next 5 to 10 years, and what contributions is it making towards research, innovation, and especially leadership development for Pakistan?
Right. So, so the question of research is actually the complex one for us, right? So because there is a very vast enterprise and a very unproductive and extremely questionable enterprise that exists already, and the reference points of it are very, very strong and are difficult for us to continue to push back against. So the research in our context means that we support the faculty member who would want to do a research to overcome a content gap. Because of this Eurocentricity, there is always a content gap when it comes to teaching or creating something in context. So if they wish to embark on a research journey, which creates a great piece and informs, let's say, something about sin from a different perspective, Habib University will deeply support it in every way, financially and time and so on. Then we will support something which ensures participation of students, undergraduate students. So again, an unimaginative idea of research is only invested in having graduate students, but now many institutions have proven that actually undergraduate students are actually very, very competent research partners. And in certain ways, they have more spirit and more skills to be that. So that's another precondition that we want our faculty to fulfill if they do. The third is that if they are doing research to solve an important or reflect on an important problem in Pakistan, or a problem that is relevant to Pakistan. So that's something which is, deeply close to our heart. And a lot of our faculty has actually done that, so that they've looked at urban problems in Karachi, and we have produced some good work. And another precondition is that if there is somebody globally who's working on something interesting which is relevant to the region or relevant to Pakistan and relevant to what Habib University is doing, and if they wish to partner with them, so we will support it, and etc. So that's how we want to really create the right kind of fences around where we want to invest our resources. Because otherwise it's a wayward enterprise, and as you may have heard many statistics, the 99% of research production, nobody ever reads, nobody ever quotes. It's just there because it is tied to the promotion, and it is tied to tenure, and it is tied to accreditation, and etc. Those are all not very good incentives.
Let me pause here, and before we go on to the innovation and leadership development part of the question, I think it took me a long time in my own academic journey to realize the difference between a research-centered university and a teaching-centered one. And I think, would you like to expound on that, particularly from the context of Habib, and what your thinking was in your design?
So this is a new beast, right? It did not exist about 40, 50 years ago.
Sure.
Right, so there was no difference. The greatest, the most celebrated faculty took as much pride and as much engagement in teaching as they would in research. And they were one and the same thing, right? So there was a great deal of participation at every level of students. This all started, somewhere around 70s when Nixon got very insecure with student movement and the relationship with. So a lot of money got poured into universities, and especially via law schools and business schools and etc. And Pentagon as well. So there was so much, the lure of it was so powerful that it started to create this dichotomy, more and more. And this idea of R1 university came into being. which meant that if you're doing more research and less teaching, it is good for your career. So much so that at MIT, if you win the best teacher award, that means that you will never get tenure, because it would indicate that you are too invested in teaching and not bringing enough money to the university.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a cynical, unfortunate turn that it took. But it hasn't gone unnoticed, right? So a lot of great universities are taking deep notice of that. I'm aware of university-wide programs which are trying to sort of rehabilitate, especially undergraduate teaching at the heart of the university, and ensuring that their most prominent and best faculty are invested in it. But as I said, this has a 45, 50-year-old history that this distinction emerged. So few institutions which took great exception to this dichotomy have fared exceptionally well. Okay. Two come to mind in this country that we are familiar with, and I'm sure there are a few more. Harvey Mudd College, which is part of Claremont Consortium. Mm-hmm. So Harvey Mudd and Olin College, which is a little outside of Boston. And so they both had a unique problem. They were in the vicinity of Harvey Mudd, in Harvey Mudd's case, in the vicinity of Caltech, in Olin's case, in the vicinity of MIT. So they both realized that they can't play that game that Caltech or MIT are playing. They will always lose. So they changed the game. And they made their institutions about students. And they created such inspiring experiences for students that very soon they would start getting the students who would have a full scholarship offer from MIT and Caltech, but they would choose to come to those places. So the institutions became about students' achievement and the creativity that they were doing, and faculty was there to nurture it. So I think that that's an emulatable model for Pakistan. Because wonderful students and committed faculty cannot be hegemonized. A $5 billion lab and a large hadron collider obviously is not emulatable. There can only be one or two, but a great student-centered university is definitely emulatable, and that's the model that we have pursued at Habib University.
Yeah, I'm really glad you gave the example of Olin College. I actually had a student make a choice, select. I was the principal of a school very close to Olin College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and a student chose Olin over Brown University, and I was really proud of him for that. It's also, they preserved their programming by very, very small class sizes as well. I think it was a class of 160 undergraduates per year.
Right.
Okay, Wasif Saab, I don't want to sort of gloss over the part where Habib University's intentional focus. So I want the audience to hear about Habib University's intentional focus on leadership development in and for Pakistan, and how it's going about achieving that and why.
Right. So two fundamental ingredients. One I have already talked about, that you need to bring a very diverse group of students. So if you're getting students from a tiny sliver of 4 or 5% who have come from one view of the world, one type of education, mostly privileged, then you can't, and they have very tenuous interest in being in Pakistan, right? So that's why I think, so this was obviously tactical on our part, as well as I think it's a great aspiration for any university. That we have diversified our student body. So we have students from such wonderful backgrounds, and they bring great richness, and their sense of belonging is much stronger. The other is the curricular experience that I talked about. So when you're able to make sense of what's going on, right? So and you can look beyond the headlines and rhetoric and platitudes, and you are intellectually confident and are able to analyze, and you have skills which have given you confidence that you will be successful. I think those are the necessary basis for cultivating potential leadership. That not in a jingoistic way, any kind of nationalistic or patriotic thing, but I think it is an intellectual path. And most of our students have demonstrated that. that they feel that Pakistan is not on Mars, contrary to common belief. The problems that Pakistan face are pretty much generic, that are found in various ways or forms anywhere in the world. And if you have a historic understanding of the moment of time that the world is in, and they can make great sense of what's happening. And then, they can aspire to do something about it. So they can, and the leadership in various forms. So they can aspire to be prominent and hopefully reach influential and leadership positions, various employers that they pick. They can look at areas which have been not understood or have not been paid attention to. So their entrepreneurial ability allows them to create something in that space. And they're also looking at public sector with some interest, and they want to participate in that as well. So there are various avenues for possible leadership, but it starts with having first a quiet sense of confidence and comfort for being in Pakistan, and that comes from their intellectual experience.
Certainly, I think many people here resonate with that idea of our youngest and brightest leaving Pakistan, and I for one can speak for myself, really appreciate the sense of love that Habib University is inculcating in its students for the country, and the sense of service that sort of accompanies that naturally. So Wasif, I think we're in the last 5 minutes, and last 7 minutes. I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions in the end. I think overall, why? And this is a very broad question. You can answer it however you choose to. But why is it important for Pakistan and Pakistanis to support Habib University, causes like Habib University? And in your opinion, how many more Habib Universities does Pakistan need right now?
I think it's not just Habib University. I would encourage Pakistanis and people of Pakistan origin to relook at their philanthropic aspiration. So one thing which makes us proud, that Pakistanis have shown to be have proven to be extremely generous as a society. It's among the most generous people in terms of proportion of GDP or so on, that they contribute towards support of other and so on. And it became extremely clear to the world during this COVID crisis. So Pakistan has fared very well, and one of the key reasons that it has fared well, that people were there to help each other. So this spirit actually is extraordinarily encouraging. So I would think that but a reshaping, a shift in that focus is required, and higher education generally needs to become a cause, especially from the perspective of ensuring access of this disenfranchised group, students who have tremendous potential and talent but just don't have means. So I think that's a direct impact of any kind of philanthropy on higher education. The other is a positive signal to scholars. So Pakistan has no tradition of supporting through via philanthropy scholarship. So it's unheard of that there's a philanthropic gift which has created a faculty chair to investigate or to do something interesting, which is commonplace, especially in the US. Then there is a question of a meaningful legacy as well. So I think from that perspective, not only Habib University, I think I would encourage Pakistanis to really look at the impact of their philanthropy, that how they can see higher education as a high impact area. If they support it, it will actually generate a great deal of outcome. Then obviously they need to analyze the nature of that higher education that they wish to support. And in that, of course, my vested interest is, and I would advocate that the nature of higher education at Habib is a very appropriate one for Pakistanis to support.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more. I work on the lower end of or lower education as opposed to higher education, and I certainly I think I'm going to take your vocabulary today that about 50 years ago, all education, higher education in Pakistan shifted to vocational training and primarily focused on medicine and engineering, and we need a lot of people, we need a lot of kids, young kids and families thinking about liberal arts as an opportunity and not a something they settled for. I think that will come with more awareness as to what liberal arts is and what opportunities it holds for students. Wasif Saab, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the audience for tuning in from Pakistan, from the US, from all over the world. It's been a wonderful pleasure, Wasif Saab, hosting you on the Park Launch platform. And inshallah, we hope to see you here, having many successful events in the US and across the world, and as well as continuing to partner with us down the line. And we hope to welcome you back here down the line as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and a good rest of your day.
My pleasure. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.